Hello, and welcome to Talking Sense, a Pittsburgh Works Together interview series featuring our region's most influential leaders. We'll get their perspectives on jobs, the economy, and other topics vital to Pittsburgh's progress. I'm Doris Nagy, and on today's special episode, we're giving you exclusive access to our recent event highlighting the challenges facing our electric grid. Pittsburgh Works Together hosted legislators and civic leaders to help educate them about issues surrounding electricity generation and transmission. The event featured a panel discussion with representatives from PJM Interconnection, Constellation, and Duquesne Light Co. We hope you enjoy this insightful and informative discussion.
Okay, so our panel today, I think will offer even deeper insights into the topic of the day. And let me introduce them to you. First, we have Stephen Bennett. Stephen's the Senior Manager, Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for PJM Interconnection. David Fisfis. David's the VP of Energy Policy and the General Counsel for Duquesne Light Co. Adrien Ford, the Director of Wholesale Market Development for Constellation Energy. And our moderator, Dr. Elizabeth Cook, Vice President of Technical Strategy for the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies. So Dr. Cook, if you could first tell us a little bit about your background, what AEIC does, and then you can kick it off with your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So as stated, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook. A little bit about myself. I've been in the industry, I can now officially say, a little over 20 years, supporting the electric utility space. I'm just going to, from a background perspective, the first 12 years I spent as a power system engineering consultant, really getting dirty with the data, building the models, running the analyses, and transmission became my first love. So I think today we're going to hear a lot about transmission, but I would like to plant a few seeds about this thing called distribution before we kick off. Then I took my consulting role and I was traveling quite a bit. So I came into the local utility that I was born and raised into, Duquesne Light, where I was the senior manager of transmission, ultimately distribution planning, and then was running the grid modernization strategy until this group called AEIC and my passion to teach and educate the many stakeholders that are involved in this transformation that we're all seeking and going through. So the last year I spent really advising and consulting and supporting the AEIC organization, which is a 141-year-old organization. That's me in a nutshell, and I will share one other nugget or two as we kind of introduce each of the guests as we go down. One of my asks was to give my perspective on the notes that we just heard, so hopefully as we introduce ourselves, kind of give your perspective of what you heard, what you feel in your position, and then we'll kick it off with a series of questions. So thanks. I guess, no, go ahead. I'll let you go first, Adrien.
Good morning, good afternoon. Okay, it's working. Thank you. So Adrien Ford with Constellation. Just a little bit about me. I'm a Georgia Tech engineer, spent about 12 years or so with Southern Company, ultimately over in Europe with them, standing up a trading floor. And when I found my way back to Pennsylvania, I'm on the other side in the Philly area, to get married, ended up going back to work at PJM. And there worked for about 8.5 years or so on the market side of things, and then transitioned into regulatory work supporting Old Dominion Electric Co-op. It's based out of Richmond, Virginia, representing them at PJM, and I now represent Constellation. For those of you that don't know Constellation, we're a large independent power producer, but we're also a very large load server. It's a natural hedge for our capital assets, so you can see why that would make sense. And we're one of the top 10 gas traders as well. So we have a wide variety of interests. Many of you may have seen news that we're going to be reopening 3 Mile Island as now the Crane Clean Energy Center, and I think we might get into that. In terms of my thoughts on Mr. Gallagher's opening comments, I would say 98% agree with what he said, and completely agree that it's really important for the grid that we have both resource adequacy, as well as essential reliability services to support the reliability of the electric grid. And I do view those as two separate pieces. So I was glad that you spoke on the essential reliability services separate and apart from the kind of megawatt math problem that's before us in terms of supply and demand balance. They're definitely two different pieces, but both important for reliability. I would say the one thing I might pick at just a little bit is the timeline. I think you said we have a transition that's going to happen in 10 to 15 years and so much quicker. And I don't know how long it's going to take this clean energy transition, so I'm not going to put a number on it. Maybe we have 10 to 15 years left, but we've been working at it for 20 already. So I think we shouldn't discount the time that we've already seen. We've seen a large transition in the fleet, and for the most part, it's made it more diverse to date, which I think has made it therefore more reliable. We've had an increase in natural gas generation in our fleet while we're beginning to bring in renewables. Renewables in some other parts of the country are far higher, have a far higher penetration, but here in our region, Pennsylvania and the broader PJM grid, it's not been as rapid, and I think that's really helpful for the PJM region and reliability. And the other thing I might pick out a little bit was the slowdown, and I don't know if that was a slowdown on serving data center load, if that was a slowdown on integrating renewables. So I'd love to have a discussion afterwards to see what that was really about, because we might be in complete agreement and we might be diametrically opposed, and I don't know because I'm not sure.
Slowdown's not the data centers we've got to serve.
Okay, then we're aligned on that. Okay, great. So he said that the data centers have to be served, so we're fully aligned on that. But I do want to highlight the important work that Reliability First does. And if you don't take advantage of them and the information that they can provide you, as well as PJM and the information they can provide you, I would encourage you to do so, because they're studying this and they have great analysis that they can support in a fact-based manner. So I just want to give kind of a kudos there for them. Did that cover?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. You want to kick off?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Bennett. I'm with PJM. I've been in and out of the energy world for a couple decades, but mostly in. And actually started my career, I'm a University of Maryland engineer, so probably a lot of engineering folks up here today. But started my career actually in the IT world at ISO New England. And I was at ISO New England before there was anything, like there were no ISOs or RTOs actually operational in the United States at the time. We were at the time racing with California to be the first ISO to actually come online and serve our customers. California ended up winning. You can decide whether or not what came out of that was a positive or not, but I was doing IT work there. So eventually I did what all IT folks do, and I switched over to government relations because it's the obvious kind of pathway for a career. And I've been spent 10 years at Exelon, a little bit of time at PPL, and then a little over 7 years at PJM. If you don't know what PJM is, we are the RTO for the Mid-Atlantic region. We serve 13, all are part of 13 states and the District of Columbia. We serve over 65 million people. A little over 1/5 of the United States GDP is generated within our borders. And to Tim's point, all of that really starts with reliable energy. So the people that live, work, play, pray in our territory, the businesses, the GDP, all starts with safe, reliable energy. And that's our focus, reliability. So when you hear about PJM, if you do hear about PJM, most of the time you hear about our markets, capacity market, the costs, things of that nature. Maybe lately you've heard about the interconnection queue, so what it takes for a generator to interconnect to our grid. But at the end of the day, our primary mission is reliability. That's what PJM does. When I wake up when my colleagues wake up every morning, our focus is making sure that the lights stay on for those 65 million people and 21% of the US GDP. So that's where our focus is. Now, we do a lot of things to make sure that we are successful. We have a planning group that does transmission planning for the entire grid. We have an operations group that is in our control rooms right now, making sure that those bullets hit each other on an instantaneous basis. And let me tell you, their job over the next couple of days is going to be very challenging because we're looking at some very severe cold. I was actually just told this morning that we will likely hit our winter peak on Tuesday. So we will likely hit the most load or demand that PJM has ever seen in the wintertime on this upcoming Tuesday. And then we have a markets group. And if PJM markets are a mechanism, it's a tool to efficiently allocate the scarce resources of supply and demand, just like any other market. So, at PJM, we use these tools every day, but again, our focus is on reliability, keeping the lights on. As far as Mr. Gallagher's comments, I may try to write into my next contract that I will only present at events where he goes first, because so much of what his message was is an echo and amplification of what PJM's message is right now. We have a concern with the trends that we're seeing in the supply-demand balance, right? We're seeing that load increase. And there's a lot of maybe discussion about, is the load increase that is being predicted, will it come out at that level? And I don't know that we know that. And I know that with data centers driving so much of the load increases that we're seeing, the data center developers themselves are telling us, look, we're pitching projects in multiple locations. And sometimes it's the same project in multiple locations. So that's happening. We all acknowledge that, we all know that. But regardless of amplitude, I don't think anybody can credibly argue that load is not increasing significantly and increasing in ways that we haven't seen for the past decade. So load is going up. It's just how we operate as a society, as an economy. And at the same time, to Mr. Gallagher's point, we're seeing generation come off of the grid. And some of that's normal, the economic life cycle of generation. It's not infinity, right? There are certain generators that reach a point where they're no longer economically efficient and should no longer be part of the grid. But we're also seeing policies, federal, state, and other policies that are forcing generators to come off the grid in advance of their normal economic life cycle. And I think, to the slowdown piece, I think when you hear PJM and when you hear, our executive team or our CEO, Manu Asthana, talking about slowdown, it's certainly not slowing down serving load. I concur, and I think PJM concurs completely that we have to serve that load. Data centers and AI, that's not just an economic development aspect, although it is one. That's a national security concern. That is, AI may be one of the biggest components of the United States maintaining its role as an economic and military superpower, right? We can't lose that race, so we have to serve that load. But the slowdown that we talk about is don't remove generation from the grid until we're certain that we have the replacement generation available. Because to Mr. Gallagher's point, you have to, demand and supply have to meet instantaneously, every day, 24/7, regardless of the weather outside, regardless of the policies that are promulgated at the state, local, or federal level. We have to meet that demand. And so again, that's where our focus is. That's what we do every day. That's what we leverage our tools for. And again, in the next couple of days, we're gonna have some challenges, but I'm fairly confident based on what our operations folks are telling us that we'll make it through and the lights will stay on.
Thank you. David?
Good afternoon. My name is David Fisfis. I'm the Vice President of Energy Policy at Duquesne Light Company. How many of you are Duquesne Light customers? Great. Thank you for being here. Thank you for paying your bill on time. I wanted to start with highlighting a couple things about Duquesne Light. Obviously, we're the local electric utility. Because of deregulation, which was like 25 years ago, we do not own generation. So it's the cowpines of the world that are generating the electricity. Our job is to take it across the transmission lines and through our distribution system and deliver it to your businesses and your homes and in this building. So the perspective we bring to it is sort of agnostic to the generation source, but what we're not agnostic to is there enough of it? And so we look at this very much from a reliability standpoint, which many of the panelists have been talking about. Reliability is obviously a technical word. What it really means is, like, when you throw a switch, like these lights come on, and when you charge your phone gets charged, and you take it for granted, and you should take it for granted. That's reliability. What has not been talked about, but we also need to touch upon, is affordability. And so we need to do everything we can to maintain affordability for our customers and for economic development in Pennsylvania and certainly in southwestern Pennsylvania. Tim has touched upon sort of the reliability piece of part of the challenge. What we have not talked about, and so I think we need to provide specifics, are what is the size of the problem that we're dealing with? And so PJM, which is responsible for identifying, the reliability issue, has projected by 2030, we're going to be short in PJM. So this is the whole 11 or 13 state area, about 30 to 40 gigawatts. And Tim touched upon, well, like, what's a gigawatt? So if you think of it just in simple numbers, a gigawatt provides enough electricity for 1 million homes. So by 2030, we're projected to be 30 to 40 million homes short of electricity in PJM. A real significant problem. Let's talk about affordability. We've touched upon very briefly this capacity market. And in PJM, there are different pieces that they provide through their market. There's an energy price, which is what you pay for the electricity that you get right away. But they also pay to the cowpines and the constellations of the world a capacity price, which is for the generation to just be there, whether it's used or not. That's intended to, in part, cover their fixed costs. PJM did a capacity market auction about 6 months ago. And the cost of capacity pricing for all of us as the consumers skyrocketed. So what does that mean? In 25 and 26, the additional cost to Duquesne Light customers for this capacity charge, which is intended to incentivize new generation, is $212 million. Our customers are going to pay next year. What does that mean for Pennsylvania customers? Pennsylvania customers, for this 1 year of additional capacity charge, are going to pay $2.5 billion more. And what does that mean for the 65 million customers across PJM? For that 1 year, they're going to pay an additional $12.5 billion. Now, those additional costs are supposed to incentivize new generation, right? We got this 30 gigawatt shortfall that's coming. It's supposed to incentivize new generation. How much generation has been announced from 25 to 26 for this additional cost? None. So the current market construct is broken from both a reliability and an affordability standpoint. And so when the lights go out, if the lights go out, like, are they calling PJM? Are they calling Constellation? No, they're calling Duquesne Light, and they're going to call the elected officials, right? And when the bills go up, are they calling PJM or are they calling Constellation? No, they're calling Duquesne Light and they're calling their elected officials. So, like, that's the, Tim's presentation was a little bit depressing, sorry, because of the challenge that we have, but it was factually spot on, right? So I'm just adding some additional context to sort of what we're dealing with. All of us need to be part of that solution. PJM needs to be part of that solution. Constellation needs to be part of that solution. Duquesne Light needs to be part of that solution. But we've spent a lot of time admiring the problem. And what we really need to be talking about, and this is also where the elected officials come in, is like, how are we going to solve it? Like, what are we going to do? That's the economic opportunity for Pennsylvania. We are a net generator. We are exporting to the East Coast, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, DC. They're not building any new generation, and because of their environmental policies, they're actually closing their coal plants, and they're not permitting gas plants. So we have an economic opportunity to build new generation in Pennsylvania to help feed the rest of PJM and make sure the lights stay on in Pennsylvania, and we do it affordably. That's all. So those are my opening comments.
Thank you. Okay.
I think it might be instructive to just to level set a little bit about the capacity market. I mean, so PJM has three main markets that provide revenue to a supply resource. It's the energy market, which is by far the largest. It's where the bulk of the financial interactions that occur at PJM, largest percentage is in the energy market. The capacity market is a smaller amount. The energy market is day ahead in real time. The capacity market is meant to be 3 years forward, unfortunately, because of a lot of regulatory churn, for lack of a better term. We haven't had a 3-year forward auction in some time. We're desperately trying to get back to that because it's supposed to be a forward signal, not a prompt signal. And lately, it's been more of a year ahead prompt signal, and that's not what it's designed for. It's designed to be 3 years forward, so hopefully we can get back to that. And then the ancillary service market, which is by far our smallest market, and that's some of the grid and network hygiene that's provided by spinning mass and things of that nature. That's a much smaller. But the reality is all three markets together are meant to provide a financial signal to incentivize behavior. Okay, so it's the capacity market itself is not exclusively meant to incentivize new generation. It's part of a comprehensive market signal that tells a generator that you should potentially invest in new generation, continue to run if you're already on the grid, or potentially deactivate your generator because you're no longer an economic participant based on the market signals that you're getting. So the capacity market is not exclusively meant to incentivize new generation. It's part of that comprehensive market signal. It's a market signal that incentivizes multiple behaviors, like new generation that comes on, like the natural gas plant in Illinois that almost immediately reversed its deactivation decision once the auction print was out, and and to the point, David's point, there are a number of generators out there that were contemplating retirement that looked at that signal and said, we're going to wait. Now, it's very hard to quantify that. Like, I don't know how many that is. And that's a difficult kind of policy point to make. But there are generators out there for certain that did not retire because the capacity market printed where it did. The other thing I'll say is we are going through an interconnection queue reform process. So flat out, PJM's interconnection queue was not designed for the number of projects we're seeing with the clean energy transition. It was designed for a couple of 100 kind of central state, larger fossil fuel or thermal, I won't even say fossil fuel, thermal-based plants to come on the grid each year. With the uptick of renewables, that turned into thousands. So we had to reform the grid. And so we're in the middle of that transition. But even though we're in the middle of that transition, we're giving out interconnection agreements to generators every day. And I know this because the emails come through. Every time we enter into a generation agreement with a generator, I get an email. So actually lots and lots of new generators are coming on. They're getting their generator agreements. They're working through the interconnection queue. So it's not a zero. It's not ideal because we're not in a 3-year forward auction and because we're going through the interconnection queue, but we are signing agreements. There are generators that are seeking to interconnect to the grid. Some of that is incentivized by the capacity market, and some generators that will remain on the grid are incentivized by the entire market signal.
Okay, so 2 points. One is most of the generation that's in the queue is renewable. And renewable is important. It's part of that all the above. We should put as much renewables on the system as we possibly can. But the renewables, to Tim's point, are not going to fill the void. When we use the term thermal, that's code for gas and coal, by the way. And when we talk about dispatchable, that's a generation that can come on right away. That, again, is gas and coal. The renewables can do some of that, but they're not dispatchable. So most of what is in the PJM queue is renewables, which is not dispatchable, which is not going to fill the void. It'll help. And I think everything that PJM can do with their markets to help fold the void, we should support and endorse. But for Pennsylvania, getting back to the solutions, we need to make sure that the lights stay on in Pennsylvania and it's as affordable as possible. So what are some of those solutions? One is, right now, if we sit here today, because we've delegated some of the responsibility to PJM, when 2029 or 2030 comes, we actually don't know whether we're short or long in the state. We think we're going to be long, but we're not sure because we've delegated that authority to PJM. So what Duquesne Light has asked for is that the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, which has the authority, do what's called an integrated resource assessment for the state so that we know in Pennsylvania, is there sufficient generation to meet our load, which it also addresses what data centers, can be big draws, are going to be. So then we at least have a common set of facts that we're working from so our policyholders can make decisions about sort of what we need to do in Pennsylvania. The second thing we need to look at is how do we incentivize new generation? Obviously, PJM is going to help with that, but can they do that alone? And so another thing we're going to look at is, should the utilities look at doing long-term contracts that are going to incentivize new generation to be built in Pennsylvania? And then a third thing is, if New Jersey and Delaware and Maryland don't want to build generation there, should the independent power producers, the ones that own the power plants, should they be looking at doing long-term contracts where the generation's built in Pennsylvania and we export it under long-term contracts to the East Coast? So those are a couple of sort of the specific solutions, but we need help from the policymakers and in some instances the legislature to help make this happen.
Yeah, I'm not quite certain how an integrated resource assessment would be useful. Pennsylvania is a huge net exporter as it is. And I think sometimes the discussions get blended. People talk about price, which is based on a region, and then they talk about an assessment based on a very long state. So I think maybe, but I don't know, if the conversation is concerned about price, which I can understand, and wanting to serve both reliably and affordably, which is definitely a goal for Constellation as well, maybe what we need to look into is long-term hedging, where you can lock in the price now, and that's an overlay. And that's how PJM was designed, to be the spot market, and then for long-term hedging to happen around that. So I think that's a more productive path for investigation. Thanks.
I think our time is ending, but I will say I did give the questions to everyone prior, and they kind of went ahead and answered them as we went. So do we, right? We're wrapping up here?
Yeah, we are. There are a couple questions though. Based on the conversation here, and Dave, I think you hit on it most, was what can policymakers and legislators do? I don't know what goes on in the rest of the country. I sort of know what goes on around here. And I think in talking with Tim and others that know a lot more about this than I do, the simple bottom line is we've removed generation through policy, whether it be RGGI, which has been bounded about for 8 to 10 years now, or stated proclamations of 50% of our generation has to be renewables by a certain date. And as just a regular old guy who pays his utility bill, sorry, Dave, I'm West Penn Power.
That's okay. If you pay on time, they're happy to.
Yeah, I do. So, it's the common sense of it here. And, we do things that reduce the generation that are then in turn driving these auctions and all these other things that are, out there and not the easiest thing for the average person to understand. What is it that we could do in Pennsylvania, both as, people that work to try and create or change policy? We have several legislators in the room. What can we do to ensure when 2030 comes along that we're in a position where we don't have rolling brownouts or blackouts, I was thinking of having them shut all the electricity off in here today just to make a point, but they didn't want to do that. So, what is it we could do here in Pennsylvania, and sort of just answer that as our final thought.
Sure, I'd be happy to take a stab at that. I think one thing that could be really helpful is just ease of constructability. So before constructing, you need a certificate of public convenience and necessity, CPCN. I always forget what it stands for. Making that easier to get, making the access to water and all the things that go along with actual development of generation. What you can do is ease those processes to let them come on more quickly.
Yeah, I'll give just a couple points, and I really appreciate the question. When we talk about we and the energy policy, obviously Pennsylvania's energy policy can be improved and refined, but it's a hell of a lot better than New Jersey's or Maryland's or Delaware's, right? So when you talk about those requirements, it's those states' energy policies that are creating the PJM problem, right? They had these very aggressive environmental goals. They're relying upon offshore wind, which is not getting built and is not favored by the Trump administration. So even when the Biden administration favored it, it still didn't get built, and it's not going to get, it's going to be harder to get built during the Trump administration. So again, those East Coast states, their environmental policies are making this difficult for PJM and provide an opportunity for us because we can export, but they're also making life more difficult for us in Pennsylvania. So some of the things, again, we can do, I totally agree. Permitting, siting, building, generation, and transmission, to the extent the policyholders can help with that. Another piece is we touch upon is keeping generation online. Keystone and Conemaugh, which is their coal-fired units in Cambria County, 2.5 gig. So again, that's 2.5 million homes. They're slated to close in 2028. Extending those for at least a couple of years to help bridge us is important for Pennsylvania. We closed huge power plants, coal-fired power plants at Homer City and at Bruce Mansfield, helping to get those repowered as gas-fired generation. When you build new power plants, you need three things, right? You need water, you need a fuel source, and you need transmission. So those existing plants, repowering them, they have all three of those already. So those are some of the very specific things we can do to bring more generation online in Pennsylvania in the short term.
Yeah, so I echo almost all of that, I think. From a policymaker perspective, I think one thing that Pennsylvania policymakers can do is to work with companies like Duquesne about creative solutions. Like look at opportunities to hedge their capacity market exposure for their customers. Rethink maybe how the default service procurements go. Allow them to do longer term contracts, things of that nature, but work with the utilities themselves because one thing that we know, because Duquesne is a member and the utilities and the transmission, they're on the ground working with customers every day. And every one of their situations, there's a lot of similarities, but there's variances as well. So policymakers sit down, listen to them. What can they do? What can you do together to maybe ameliorate some of the immediate cost impacts on customers right now through longer term procurements? I think my other member on this side, I just realized I'm kind of flanked by members, so I really should have been on my better behavior maybe.
You're doing fine.
Thanks. Is certainty, right? Like in Pennsylvania has decided to restructure their generation market, which means private capital is put at risk to develop generation. And regardless of what you're investing in, what do you want when you have private dollars investing? You want regulatory certainty. You want to know that if you're good at what you do, you can invest the money and make a return. And there's not going to be a regulatory or some other kind of interference or overlay that changes that or means that despite you being good at what you do, you don't make any money. So certainty, as much as you can, work with the generators, know what they need from a siting perspective, from a process perspective. Because again, they're all going to be slightly different. There's a lot of similarities. They're all going to need slightly different things. From PJM's perspective, two things I'd say is, please do not promulgate any policy that pushes a generator off the system until you know that its replacement is in place. We say that everywhere. It's not really something that we worry about that much in Pennsylvania. It's not something we've seen as a policy kind of precedent. We see it in other places, but please don't adopt that. And then the other thing is, if you're a policymaker in here and you're interested in these issues and you want to know more, demand that I come to your office and explain it, because that's my job. And this is hard stuff. It's complicated. You know, I have a very good friend who says in the power industry, people want lights on, water hot, beer cold. And that's it. That's all they think about. But as Tim said, there's so much more that goes behind making those things happen. I can help you understand that. I can talk to you about what we're doing to keep the trilemma in, try to manage that, because it's really difficult right now. But I will come to your office. I will bring whatever I can, whatever resources, and I will talk to you and explain to you what we're doing. So hopefully you feel a little bit more comfortable that you have a partner in Valley Forge that's working for your customers, that's working for the environment, and that's working to keep the lights on.
Dr. Cook, we have a minute or so. Anything else, or you good?
I maybe sound like a broken record, but almost everything that they state with words is either a process or it's a set of decision makers that have to be informed. And so really, if we lean in back to basics, where is the data? What are the models looking like? And are we effectively empowering the next generation to really look at the grid holistically as systems and systems? So, lots of big problems, but there's some roots that could be fundamentally grown that could really empower us to move forward. So.
All right, well, I'd like to thank Tim Gallagher, keynote speaker today. Thank our panelists. And thank all of you for braving, this Armageddon of snow out there, which is what you would think it is when you listen to the weather on the TV station. So be safe going home. I invite you to go to pghworks.com. You'll find a lot of this information there, as well as other information on, the energy industry and energy market. So thank you very much. Have a good day.